I am going to turn it over to Elaine Allensworth, who is the Executive Director of the Chicago Consortium for School Research. She is the head and leading with the Chicago Public Schools, one of our RPP core research teams. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elaine.
Thank you, Susan. Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm coming to you from Chicago. I'm Elaine Allensworth. I'm at the University of Chicago Consortium on School Research, and I'm just one member of a much larger team. I'm going to be talking to you about the Skyline initiative. Actually, can you go back to the slide before my face? Yeah, thank you. So in Chicago, one of the major strategies developed for supporting learning recovery was to invest in high quality curricular resources along with professional development to use those resources. And they called that initiative Skyline. So I'm going to be talking about some of the lessons learned as they implemented the supports in the early grades around literacy. You can go forward 2 slides. Thanks. So Skyline was seen as the district's response to multiple forms of upheaval that were going on. There were the disruptions in student learning with the pandemic. There was also a transformation. There is a transformation happening in literacy instruction from balanced literacy to the science of reading. There's also an equity imperative, and the district saw gaps in access to high quality instructional materials as opportunity gaps that they had to address. So they felt there was this imperative to really dramatically change instructional practices and improve rates of student learning, especially for student groups most affected by the pandemic. So together with publishers, they developed a digitally delivered standards-based curriculum with high quality resources that teachers could access online, with culturally responsive texts, with real physical paper books that people could use, with aligned formative and summative assessments, with lesson plans and modifications to the lesson plans. They did this in all grades and all subjects simultaneously. So our study just focuses on K-2 literacy, but there are implications for the broader initiative. So this was very ambitious. It was, ambitious in terms of the scale and the speed of the launch of this initiative. And the district recognized this, that there were going to be things that needed to change, right? That it was not going to be perfect. And so they actually embedded continuous improvement into their contracts with vendors and partners. And they also planned for continuous improvement by reaching out to researchers to provide input as they were rolling this out. So continuous improvement was really an integral part of this, and the idea is that you can have it online so you can make these continual changes. It was also ambitious because any kind of initiative that involves technology is going to have demands in terms of the technical infrastructure and also in terms of the digital literacy that is needed for the users. So next slide, I'm going to talk about lessons learned in terms, first of all, lessons learned in terms of rolling out curriculum as this dynamic product, this digital curriculum. And it seems very likely that digital resources are going to become more prevalent in this new, the new world going forward. And there are a lot of advantages to curriculum as this dynamic product. You can roll out, and the district was able to roll out the curriculum, and all these materials to all schools at once. Any modifications, new things that are added can immediately be accessed by anybody. And teachers, definitely saw this as a huge improvement, especially if they were in schools that did not already have access to high quality resources. And it brings coherence across classes, across grade bands. We especially saw improvement in schools that were teaching Spanish language arts, where they often did not have materials before that a third of the district in Chicago starts as multilingual learners whose home language is Spanish. And we found that the more that materials are similar across English language arts and Spanish language arts, the easier it was for teachers. Teachers teaching in bilingual classes or mixed classes, or as students transition into English language arts classes. The cultural representation in the text was a really important selling point to schools, and it's been really well received both by students and by teachers. And of course, the digital delivery, facilitates continuous improvement in real time. But just because it can be improved doesn't mean that the resources can go out unpolished. And so that gets into a lot of the limitations with the digital curriculum. First of all, any initiative that involves technology is going to have technical issues, and any new curricular resources really need to be tried out and vetted. And so, of course, there were technology issues, and there was a steep learning curve for teachers to use the materials, with both because of the technology and also because there's so many materials, it could just be overwhelming. The district thought, has designed this for teachers to do subtractive planning. So they have lots of materials, and then teachers can use those aspects that make sense in their context. But that takes a lot of effort to figure out how to do that. And so one thing you really need to keep in mind is that the materials really need to be easy to use in order to actually be used and to be useful for improving instruction, right? So it makes teachers' jobs easier. It makes it easier to deliver high quality instruction instead of making it harder. And so in this case, it was difficult to integrate some of the slides with Google Classroom or to edit the slides. And so those kinds of things made it more difficult for teachers. And then unlike paper resources, because the resources change, that also can put demands on teachers. For example, you could, implement a lesson one year, the next year you go to implement it, and now the resources have changed. And teachers need to be able to plan for the arc of instruction. And so even though maybe you could, roll out units, at later points in the year, if teachers can't see what's coming and have all that, the materials available for planning out their instruction for the course of the year, that's going to make it a lot harder for them. And it also means that any changes in resources really need to be tweaks rather than changes in that big arc of instruction. It also means that teacher support is really important. And this is true for any new curriculum. Just having resources is not enough to improve instruction. You really need support for teachers to use those resources. So that gets into the next lessons learned on the next slide. So we're in this environment now where we're getting used to accessing resources online, participating in Zoom professional learning events like this one. So it might make sense that you would host most professional learning online. In the case of this big curriculum rollout, the urgency of getting information out broadly, quickly, led to a focus on online resources and online professional learning. And there are definitely advantages to that. You can, access, everyone can access it. You have more control over messaging. So, you can go to scale quickly. You can have fewer trainers that can be located anywhere. You don't have to get people to the right places. Logistically, it's a lot easier. But what we saw was that there were low rates of participation in the online learning, certainly not enough to be able to really use the resources broadly. There's more participation in the summer sessions, but very low participation in the school year as teachers were actually trying to implement the curriculum. So teachers weren't getting the help they needed when they needed it. Everyone's having difficulty getting substitute teachers. It was hard to find time, but also, different users had different needs. So, there were these sessions designed where teachers would come together from different schools around the same lesson and help each other with lesson planning. But people came there with different familiarity with the technology, with the curriculum, so it made it very difficult for those sessions to be productive for teachers. Instead, what teachers have really found helpful is school-embedded professional learning and collaboration with other teachers, so that teachers are getting help as they do their work, focused on their needs. And so the district has, kind of shifted strategies to really be more about, leveraging local knowledge, leveraging collaboration. So, going to professional learning communities, instructional coaches, network instructional support, so that, teachers have that support right there in their school. We've also found that, where there were teams at schools helping each other to use the sports, or coaches helping teachers using the curriculum, in those schools, teachers were actually better able to make use of the centrally offered online professional learning because they had that support there at the school, and they also had more buy-in, right? And then we've also found that communication is just vitally important in rolling out these big initiatives. This was an initiative intended to support teachers, to make their jobs easier. And yet, of course, when teachers started using it, they really struggled. It was something very new, and, they had difficulties. And so then you have teachers, posting things online about how difficult it is. And the union came out with some messages that were critical about Skyline. So then, teachers, no one wanted to be the face of Skyline, to be the advocate or the exemplar. So that communication is really important. And also when you're continually changing resources and improving things, you want to make sure people know what those changes are. There has been a lot of growth in the use of Skyline. So, but, I think it started with 100 schools using the early literacy materials in the first year, and now it's something like over 300 schools. So it has expanded, but it really was an uphill battle. So in terms of recommendations, just you can go to the next slide, thanks. Providing high quality resources for teachers has the potential to improve practice and further equity. We definitely see teachers appreciating the new resources and supports. And embedding continuous improvement in the resources and professional learning has really good long-term potential for eventually having resources that are really easy to use, and where there's enough capacity to really use them effectively. But even if you have continuous improvement embedded in, it would be good to start small if you can, so that you can work out those kinks. But you often can't do that for political or economic reasons, which was the case here. So a lot of times, even if you want to start small, you end up starting big. So continuous improvement is a great thing to have. But even if you can do that and have continuous improvement embedded, you really want to have those materials to be easy to use, adaptable by teachers, and teachers really need that local collaborative professional learning, which means you need to have time, and routines and structures figured out so that, teachers have that help, they can get that help when they need it. They have that ability to collaborate, and they can really make good use of those resources, whether local or centralized. And then that two-way communication is really important for building capacity and buy-in with district implementers, hearing from teachers about how it's going for them, what their experiences are, and then with teachers, hearing from district folks about their intentions and where things are going and what's changed. So that's it. Next slide. Our future research. We're going to be examining changes in student outcomes, looking at teachers' use of Skyline materials and their participation in the professional learning, especially looking at differences for students in particular priority groups, and looking at the effects of school context. And I'm going to stop there.
Okay, I think we have time for about one question. So a question that we have, let me see, make sure I get camera turned on. Thank you so much for presentation. So question for you. Did the district use train the trainer model or something similar for the professional learning? And if so, did this help address some of that tension between the locally and centrally provided professional learning?
Yeah, no, they did not. They didn't feel they had enough capacity to, first of all, and it actually, when we look at this, so they did not do that model. But it does contrast with another initiative that was really successful in Chicago, which was the implementation of Common Core, the Common Core mathematics standards, where they selected, they had each school select 2 teachers to become teacher leaders in Common Core implementation. And then those teacher leaders became part of the professional community that would get together. And then those teacher teams, having those 2 teachers in schools, would work together to support each other around changing instructional practices. And then they would work to support change in the school. That ended up being very effective for changing instructional practices in Chicago. And we saw significant improvements in the quality of instruction, especially for students with the lowest tested skills, and then improvements in students' test gains, again, especially for students with the lowest tested skills, who are the least likely to have the highest quality instruction before that. So I think that there's, and they wouldn't call that train the trainer. They would, they would say they developed teacher leaders who work together, and that was a really effective mechanism. Which was not done this time because, they were trying to do this very fast. They had a lot of information to get out, and they just didn't have the capacity to be able to do that kind of model here at first.